With the changes that have taken place, provisions unfortunately with the NHS, it has made it more difficult for people to access their GPs, and so you see this increase in private GP appointments and requests to get faster referrals, etc. I think people are more informed now with being able to use the internet and gain information. Particularly now ChatGPT, that's obviously just been in the last few years. It's always a good thing to be kept on your toes, and anyone who becomes complacent really shouldn't be in the world of medicine. I think they had a recent survey showing that about 40% of ChatGPT advice was actually incorrect. But at least they're taking ownership and being able to try and find out what's wrong, and then seeing us to actually sift through that and hopefully guide them in the right direction.
The new role is almost being, as you're suggesting, the guide of helping someone go from A to B, because now I guess they have that greater sense of agency over their own journey.
I feel that we don't get taught anything about business, which has probably been the steepest learning curve for me setting up the clinic, because we really have no idea when we start, how to take care of a patient. That's the easiest part. And especially, what taught us the most really was when COVID hit, and that was where we had to adjust. The practice had only been up and running for a couple of years when that came about, and our practice was overnight, the building was shut down because it was handed over to the NHS, understandably. So we had to literally overnight become a virtual practice. I think initially you're quite naive when you're doing that process and not actually, learning the right people who would work. Then we didn't know how to interview properly. And I think recruitment was probably the most difficult side of things initially. It's not about someone fitting into a role, it's about what they can bring to the role.
Hey, Shaima, thanks so much for spending time with us today. I know it's always busy. You do a lot, you wear a lot of hats. So I think maybe just to get started would be great to ask you just to introduce yourself. If that's all right, just at a high level for the folks who are listening. Tell us who you are, how did you end up here? Of all the different things you could have done, how did you get here?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Gerard. I'm a private GP and have been practicing private general practice for over 20 years, and internationally as well as in the UK. Trained and, went to medical school here at Imperial College and trained within the NHS, and then moved to the independent sector in 2006. So as far as what I do now, I'm a co-founding director of a private general practice called Chelsea Medics, based in Chelsea and Marylebone. And I also wear, as you said, several hats. I'm the BMA Practice Committee Deputy Chair for Primary Care, and also the Independent Doctor Federation GP Chair, which is the biggest federation for independent doctors in the UK.
Got it. So many different hats.
Yes, quite a few. Keeps me busy.
I could imagine. So you mentioned in your introduction, thank you for that, you mentioned the sort of transition to private practice. I think it was 2006?
Yeah, exactly.
So 2006, now we're in 2026, that's 20 years. I imagine you will have seen a lot of things change, a lot of things come and go. The market has changed, the patient body has changed, the expectations of private practice have changed. We could probably go down any one of those as a whole conversation to itself, but just at a high level, if you had to zoom out and say the top one or two changes over the last 20 years, what have those been like from wearing the hat of practitioner? And then maybe I'll ask you the same question wearing the hat of practice owner. But initially as a practitioner, how would you sort of sum up the changes of the last 20 years in terms of the clinical provision?
Well, in the UK, where, I've predominantly been working, I think the change has been the fact that there's an increase in patients seeking private care. Okay. That's probably the biggest change that I have seen. Initially, private healthcare really in the UK was more for either internationals or a few, people who are able to afford the private, healthcare system. With the changes that have taken place, provisions, unfortunately, with the NHS, it has made it more difficult for people to access their GPs. And so you see this increase in private GP appointments and requests to get faster, referrals, etc.
Got it. So last 20 years, one of the biggest changes for you from a clinician perspective is patient access is just a different game. The volume is different. The demands are different. Okay, got it. Makes sense.
And I think patient education also. I mean, I think people are more informed now with being able to use the internet and gain information. I mean, particularly now ChatGPT, that's obviously just been in the last few years, but Google's been around for quite a while. And so patients are much more informed and know what they want from medicine now, as opposed to, I think, in the past where they just believed the doctor was correct.
Interesting. How has that, before going on to practice owner hat, how has that impacted, or has it impacted the way in which you practice medicine? I'm sure it's changed the conversation you've had with patients and more informed. They probably come with their own questions. They have, as you're saying, different opinions that they hold before they even show up to you. But how has that changed or informed your own practice?
Well, I mean, I think it's a good thing, to be honest. I think it's made us ensure that we are keeping ourselves up to date and that we're making sure that we're able to provide that information and care for the patients that they deserve. And it's always a good thing to be kept on your toes, and anyone who becomes complacent really shouldn't be in the world of medicine. So yes, it can be more challenging at times, particularly when some of the information that patients do acquire is not correct, or fear-mongering, which unfortunately is the case. I mean, I think they had a recent survey showing that about 40% of ChatGPT advice was actually incorrect. So I think from a medical perspective, that is so it does keep us on our toes, but it's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing for patients to be better informed, but at least as long as they come to the health professional to really actually clarify.
Interesting. One of the things that sort of stands out to me in what you've said is this idea that in some ways the patient, I don't know if accountability is quite the right word, but in some ways the patient showing up with more, be that the right assumptions or the wrong assumptions. I guess we could have that conversation separately, but the fact that they're showing up with something already changes the game. They're showing up with a baseline expectation, again, right or wrong, but they're showing up, I guess, ready to engage in the conversation in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Taking ownership of their own health, and investigating and spending that time to try and find out what is wrong with them. I mean, I don't agree that's correct to be using it 100% at all. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think that the information that's out there generally doesn't harm. Obviously, you've got the risk of health anxiety, and a lot of the information can be very scaremongering and not true. But at least they're taking ownership and being able to try and find out what's wrong, and then seeing us to actually sift through that and actually hopefully guide them in the right direction.
Interesting. Yeah. In some of the conversations I've had recently, the word you just used comes up a lot, which is that idea of guide. In some ways, obviously, the medical practitioner as a non-practitioner, I guess in some ways they're now playing the same role and a new role. The same role is continuing to be a medical practitioner. The new role is almost being, as you're suggesting, the guide of helping someone go from A to B, because now I guess they have that greater sense of agency over their own journey.
Yeah.
I guess at a macro level, people are perhaps more aware and thoughtful about it as well, which is interesting to hear. Changing hats for a minute. So now stepping out of the clinic room and sort of into the business room, you are running your practice, you're co-founder of a private practice. You set that business up from zero. How has the business of running a clinic changed over the last 10, 20 years? Whatever timeline makes sense, but how have things changed? Not necessarily thinking about patient access, but more so thinking about the mechanics of running the business every day.
Well, I mean, obviously, if you're talking about, right at the beginning, people weren't really even using computers very much. It was handwritten notes, right? So So there's been a huge change from a tech perspective anyway, from running a practice. It's impacted in a positive way to help us with notes, etc., taking notes, prescribing. We have digital prescriptions now. There's easier communication between staff via emails, etc. So I think from a practice perspective, even simple things like accounts and, using Zero yeah, it's all tech, really. That's probably been the biggest change in running the practice and hopefully making it more efficient.
So it's interesting. You just used the phrase, it's all tech.
Yeah.
And I think it's so interesting because obviously we agree with a lot of that. But I think the thing that we find so interesting is that, and people will say this, right? They'll say, oh, healthcare practitioners went into medicine because they wanted to treat patients, not because they wanted to be business owners. They didn't want to be technologists. They just wanted to treat the patients. And I guess you've had the good fortune or bad fortune, I guess depends on which day of the week it is and how things are going. And the good fortune, bad fortune of needing to be both. I guess if I would imagine, although it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts, I'd imagine that as a practitioner, choosing what sorts of tech you adopt to improve your clinical practice might be a matter of taste in some ways, whereas as a business owner, failing to adopt tech can actually create more like structural challenges in the practice. I wonder if you found that to be true, or is that the wrong lens to have on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that could be correct. I think it's about. I mean, there's so many other aspects to it, isn't it? It's about cost. It's about the safety of the data. So when you're choosing what you're using, which company that you're using for it, I think going back to that, I think, as a medical professional, I feel that we don't get taught anything about business, which has probably been the steepest learning curve for me setting up the clinic, because we really have no idea when we start. So how to take care of a patient. That's the easiest part.
It's funny because for anyone else, they'd be melting around the customers.
Yeah, yeah. For us, I mean, that's kind of what we went in to do medicine for, But you don't learn about the business aspect, and that has been very rewarding learning process for me, but also very challenging, and should, I think, be included in the training from the start, really. But yeah, I mean, but tech, yeah, as I said, tech is a really big part of that as well now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear. And by the way, I think a lot of the clinics that we partner with, we describe the founders of those clinics as what we call the clinician entrepreneur. It's who is clinical by background, started a business, and is now building the business on the foundation of a clinician, but ultimately they are as much an entrepreneur as anyone else. It doesn't really matter that they don't have a, in quotes, business background. And it's always interesting to hear the hindsight, I wish I knew then what I know now, particularly as a business. So you said just now that you've learned a lot on the fly and you've had to figure out a lot of those business components as you've gone. If you could give advice to yourself 20 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever it was that you started to have these discoveries, this learning, going on this journey for yourself, what's the one to top most important things that you wish you had really understood when you first opened the doors to cosmetics? What was the sort of the golden nugget that you wish someone had just whacked you over the head with that took you a few years to actually learn for yourself?
I think it's all of it. There's so many aspects to business, aren't there? It's all the accounting side of it. It's the, just the marketing side of it. It's the patient retention side of it. There are so many aspects. I wish I had done some form of business management prior to setting up, I would say, just so that understanding the nuances of man management, of account management, finances, etc., everything. So I think, HR is huge, understanding that side of things, employment law. And so there's so many aspects to it. Website designing. So it's a never ending pot, of things that you learn along the way, which I wish there'd been some form of foundation before that didn't have to pick up along the way so steeply. So it wasn't such a steep learning curve.
Interesting. It is really interesting because I'll give you an example. One of the clinics that we partner with is a sort of chiropractic, integrated health, physio and medical sports masters, obviously very different than GP, healthcare service. And one of the things that he said is actually mirrors what you said, which is this idea of never endingness. I think coming to realize the fact that it's not a one and done. None of the things are one and done. It's the actual clinic is
it doesn't stop. It doesn't.
It's quite different. And as someone who's not a practitioner, I remember when I was running clinic, it was terrifying and overwhelming to have to think about what happened in the treatment room because it was so foreign. How do you handle complex cases? And we were only doing dermatology, so that was a very narrow, by comparison to what you do, is a huge range. So even in that, very overwhelming. But I can imagine similarly, I was saying, it's just nonstop. So almost being underneath a cement mixer. It just keeps coming. Yeah, it can be very overwhelming. Yeah. Interesting.
And especially, what taught us the most really was when COVID hit. And that was where we had to adjust. The practice had only been up and running for a couple of years when that came about. And our practice was overnight, the building was shut down because it was handed over to the NHS, understandably. So we had to literally overnight become a virtual practice. And it was totally, it was a mad learning experience, but also at the same time, taking care of our patients and learning what this new infection was on a daily basis because the information changed every day. So that was for us really the point where we realized that we had to do both because everything was changing from the practice perspective, from virtual, from, assessments, everything was changing. Plus we had to clinically change everything and keep our patients up to date about every day there was a new announcement about what it was.
Sure.
It's
interesting. And COVID may have really sharpened the knife on some of this stuff, as you're saying. One of the things that I know, and I remember this as well, but we actually opened clinic in the middle of COVID, which was, I don't know if it was better or worse than only being open for a few years. And then COVID was very bad in any, but I know that one of the things that changed dramatically, at least from the doctors that we worked at the time, was this idea of communication, really with the patient. Because I think, and maybe interior experience on this, but so much of what I think, and even as a patient myself, right, growing up generations ago, the thing that I always imagined and experienced as a healthcare patient was that the communication and the care provision, it happened when you were there. When you were physically in front, they told you the thing, they diagnosed the thing, they recommended the thing, they said, come back in 4 weeks and see me again. And we will see how that's changed or hasn't changed. And all of the, it almost felt like jumping from, lily pad to lily pad in the sense that the care pathway was a very high intensity moment of being together.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly in dermatology.
Right?
Yeah.
It's almost,
yeah.
A bit like orthopedics. It doesn't just really have
exactly.
But now what we see more and more, and certainly what we're experiencing as well, is that there's a lot more focus on that continuity between the jumps, the staying in touchness, the care, but the visit. And I'd be curious to understand, maybe part of that is driven by COVID, patients having a different expectation around how easy it is to communicate with or access their healthcare practitioner. But I'm wondering from either practice owner or clinician perspective, have you seen the demands of I'm going to call them a customer. I mean, it's a patient, obviously, but in private practice, also a customer. Have you seen the demands of the customer change? Have they expected different things from you as a provider over the last couple of years?
I mean, I think, definitely communication, because we had to increase that significantly during COVID. So that communication expectation is much higher, whether that be via newsletters or whether that's via email access. But that, I think the other clinical perspective, from the clinic perspective, would be the virtual side of things. That was definitely just exponentially increased during COVID from with video and telephone consultations being the prime kind of way of consulting. So having to make sure that that was something that patients had access to. I think from a clinical perspective, it was more about, I feel that the anxiety levels of patients increased, and that has stayed. People are much more acutely aware of their symptoms compared to before, where they may have just ignored them. And I think particularly in the younger generation.
Interesting. So it seems you said the younger generation. So now you've got a younger generation of patients. You're also, I'm sure, seeing a younger generation of practitioners are coming up through the old ways or changing in certain ways. And now they're, I don't know if they're starting private practice, saying their private practice. I imagine that you've seen a huge number of colleagues, collaborators move in and out of their own private practice. How would you label or describe the people who you think have gone on to be quite successful in terms of mental models, how they think, how they work, their natural ways of doing things, as opposed to those who perhaps, sort of hit a ceiling or feel quite stuck in their ways? Do those feel like two different groups of people in the?
Yeah, I think it's, as I said, because the patient expectation is much higher. So from particularly the communication side of things, so if you're not willing to do that and change with those times, you're not going to continue. So you may find some of those very, traditional general practitioners who've been running their practices for over 35 years, etc. But they've got their fixed patient base off and patient group who will continue to see them because they've been looking after them for all this time. But that patient base that they have are also that age group which aren't into the tech, who aren't into, and who are actually quite happy with the old-fashioned way of practicing, where, they go and see their family doctor and say hello and, have a biscuit and have a cup of tea and leave. But that just doesn't happen anymore. Or it does happen, but it's not as, it's decreasing, I would say. And so, yeah, the people who will continue to survive and are going to be the people who adapt to the situation, really, and have to embrace everything that goes with that in the world, and not, in medicine and the world.
Have you found in your own sort of journey of adapting, because obviously Shaima is a good example of that, sort of going on that journey of modernization, of transformation, have you found any mental models or, I hate to use the word tricks, but things that have enabled you to make that change successfully, quickly, to sort of keep pace with the changing expectations? Have there been things that you do even in your day-to-day, things that you read, think about, talk to people? I don't know what anything might be, but the sort of, I guess, the playbook that you have found for yourself as a practice owner that have become sort of a part of your, this is how to manage this, like, this ever changing. Because COVID is a great example, but it's only one example of a system shock we're going through right now with ChatGPT moment and all things AI. And I'm sure there will be 500 other shocks that are still to come. So I'm just kind of curious, you've obviously navigated those, and in the process now of navigating it, what are the how-tos that allow you to do that successfully?
I think you just have to make sure that you're aware of everything that's going on around you. And that's, from reading, the journals, from reading the, internet, kind of meeting clinicians who are setting up practices. I think I'm in the fortunate position of being into kind of organizations where you actually see new clinics coming up and running and what they're doing. And as I said, I think patient awareness has increased. So a lot of the time I'm learning from patients. Patients have said, "Oh, have you heard about this new thing, called NECO, for example?" Or, so it's you're learning from them as well, because we're very fortunate. Our patient base is such that they are very invested in their health. And so you're not just learning about what's happening in the UK, but you're also learning about what's happening internationally. And I think that's very, very important in private medicine. It should not be UK based only. It should be what's happening in the world, so that you can actually inform patients of something that may be occurring and being offered in different parts of the world, in Italy or Germany, etc., or the US, obviously. But you need to be aware of it to even obviously propose it. So it's a constant learning, and you just can't take your eye off the ball, really.
Well, I guess this idea of being with it, saying taking the eye off the ball. It's this always onness, right? There's this sort of almost a voracious appetite to keep learning, keep thinking, keep getting that exposure. And other clinic leaders I've spoken to have said a similar thing, which is it's very easy to fall into the tornado of your own echo chamber of people who practice the same medicine that you practice in the same part of the country that you practice, and not pick your head up and look sort of a bit further afield. So I can appreciate that. I think one of the things that I've heard is that one of the motivations to do that, if people don't necessarily show up with it on day one, is that they usually sometimes have one or two things that they really got wrong. And it was because they got those things wrong that they sort of took a step back and said, hold on a minute, something's not right here. Something needs to, they've sort of gone looking for some of those. So without putting you on the spot, but also entirely putting you on the spot, have there been any landmines in your journey running the practice where you were, I don't know about going through it or immediately after it, sort of look back and said, you know what, I really put my foot in it on that one. We could have done it differently. That wasn't our highlight. I'm sure there were many highlights, but if you had to sort of think about, if I could go back and do it again, I would change that thing. Do you have a sense of what that is?
To be honest, no. I think the only thing for me, probably the recruitment side of things. Maybe that would be the main thing, really.
Clinical or administrative, which side?
Administrative, generally. Yeah. I think it's always, because you just don't know when you're learning, when you're building, you just, I need this and I need that. And you just, you interview. And I think initially you're quite naive when you're doing that process and not actually, learning the right people who should be actually, who would work as a clinic. But I think, to be honest, I'm not sure whether that was because we interviewed, but it probably was that we didn't know how to interview properly. And I think recruitment was probably the most difficult side of things initially.
Interesting. Yeah. You've learned a lot on that journey. I've got a lot better at it now. And I imagine the people that you look for now, the things that you look for in I'll call it front office administrator. I'm not sure that's what you meant, but I'm sort of imagining. I imagine the kind of person you're looking for now is probably different than the kind of person that you were looking for when you started, because as you said, you learned and you evolved. How would you describe either that difference or just the person now, like, your ideal candidate, the star candidate, the magical person that really lightens the load for you? What is different then and now, or as I said, just now?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, all we're looking for which we're lucky we fortunately have now, but it was, some staff who want to be there is always a good sign. And are, patient friendly, have good work ethic, those are the kind of the main things that you're looking for, really, and who are willing to learn, who are willing to adapt, who are willing to make changes, and, and who we can learn from, who actually bring something to the table. And I think that's a huge thing. It's not about someone fitting into a role. It's about what they can bring to the role. And so it's, getting someone who fits, all those things, really. Well, staff, obviously there are different types of admin staff that we have, but yeah.
Makes sense. Do you have an example of something that a person you've hired has brought to the party that you sort of said, oh yeah, that's a good one? Is there something, I'm just imagining that someone could show up with their own systems, their own how-tos, their own playbooks, their own vendors, their own, what was this?
Yeah.
They showed up.
I mean, we've had, quite several who've done that. And, someone introduced us to, this insurance company we never heard of before, this international travel insurance company who we just never, wouldn't even thought on mind. We know of AXA, Bupa, etc., and the usual, names that are out there. And we were introduced to that, and, they're now a big part of our kind of, patients that come through the door. So that we would never have looked in that direction. So, and then we learned that, actually, yes, you should look at other types of insurance. So those are, a few people who've done that for us.
Got it. The sort of horizon scanning, the stuff that's not necessarily into you right away. It makes sense.
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time and appreciate the time you've given us already. I guess a final closing question, closing thought. I think it's always fun to say, the future of is X.
Mhm.
I think it'd be really interesting to understand your view, having gone through many of these transformations, more still to come. How would you complete the sentence? The future of private GP practice, private GP medicine in the UK is
Um, is evolving, is going to need a lot of adapting to new technology and embracing it, and not being an ostrich when it comes to technology for the future of private general practice to continue.
I gotta ask, so I've never heard the expression before. I'm gonna have to ask you.
Ostrich in the sand. So yeah, so if someone puts their head in the ostrich puts their head in, they're ignoring everything. They don't want to know what's going on, so put their head in the sand. So ostriches put their head in the sand.
Okay, God,
so
I understand now. That might be
it's like a running away.
I think that's going to be the title of this talk.
Don't be an ostrich.
Don't be an ostrich, exactly.